1, 2, 3, test 1, 2, 3. Matt Davenport, how you doing, buddy? I appreciate all y'all's work and patience with me as we pull this together. We're going to knock a home run for this inaugural shareholders meeting and set a great standard for whoever's going to do this in the future, or at least that's my idea. Good evening and welcome to the Lumbee Tribe Holdings, Inc. annual meeting. I'm Joshua Malcolm, and in accordance with Article 5 of the Lumbee Tribal Holdings bylaws, I will preside over this shareholder meeting in my role as interim CEO and president of the corporation. I've had the distinct pleasure of being involved in this for-profit enterprise on behalf of the tribe for about 2 years. About 2 years ago, I was asked by the board to provide them on an inconsistent basis some legal advice that amounted to about an hour or hour and a half a month that started in the spring of 2018. Most recently, earlier this year, the board asked me if I would come on board as a full-time in-house counsel as their inaugural general counsel. I agreed to do so. I agreed to do so at a less than 40 hours a week position to allow me to pursue other legal opportunities which I have been pursuing outside of my work at LTE. I am involved in other activities related to the tribe. As the council knows, many of the tribal members know, I also serve as the Chief Justice of the Tribal Supreme Court, and I've held that position since early 2017. I do want to make a couple of things clear. My position on the Supreme Court, I covet that position, and I'm so appreciative of the council's confidence in me a few years ago based on the recommendation of the chairman to allow me to serve our people much like the council serves our people. As it relates to the other positions that I serve in the Lumbee tribal government, as some people may see it, I want to make a few things clear. As it relates to my position on the court, if any matter came before the court related to anything involving LTH and LTE, I would be recused from that. The other justices know of that. The other justices, just like the North Carolina Supreme Court and the United States Supreme Court and other courts around this nation, have similar procedures where judicial officials recuse themselves when there's the appearance of conflict. Other justices that serve on our tribal Supreme Court have conflicts themselves, and among the justices, those conflicts are known. As it relates to my position on LTE, back in the spring of this year, the Lumbee Tribal Holdings Board asked me whether I would help them. I told them I would. I started filling this position in an official capacity on June 1st. It's very important from a legal perspective that you understand that I had to fill the position in an officially designated capacity. That relates to liability issues, it relates to coverage issues. Since my appointment as the interim CEO and president, I have not been paid $1. I've not received any compensation for my work as a member or serving in this interim capacity with LTH. Now that we've got that out of the way related to me, we're going to get to the primary purpose for tonight's meeting. First and foremost, I want to recognize several people: Tribal Chairman Harvey Godwin, Tribal Speaker Ricky Burnett, and the entire Tribal Council. Thank you. Thank you for supporting this inaugural shareholder meeting, and more importantly, I want to extend a hearty greeting to those tribal members joining via the live stream, or those members that may view this recording at some point in the future. Thank you for learning about the activities of your tribal government. How is it that we're gathered here today? We're gathered here today first and foremost because of transparency. Over a month ago, on September 3rd, 2020, during a virtual meeting of the Lumbee Tribal Council Economic Development Committee, I announced orally to the Tribal Council on behalf of the Board of Directors of LTH that this meeting would occur today. On September 22nd at 10:42, in accordance with Article 2 of the bylaws, Chairman Godwin, Speaker Burnett, and the entire Tribal Council were notified by me in writing of this meeting. The notification included, among other things, the date, the time, and the place of this meeting. It included a description of the sole shareholder of this entity, which is the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. That notification described the number of shares that are issued, and that is 100. There was a notification that this was an in lieu of meeting. And finally, there was a reminder regarding the COVID-19 conditions. On September 30th, the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina administration posted a notice on its social media page informing the tribal membership of this information that I previously described. In addition, the notice to the tribal membership informed them that this meeting would be streamed over the internet. On October 2nd, just a few days ago, another notice was placed on the social media page of the tribe, reminding our membership of this meeting, and again, letting them know this event would be live streamed. Just like the tribal council meetings occur in the tribal administration building. 3 hours before this meeting started at approximately 3:30, the tribal administration again posted a notice on its social media page informing people what time this meeting would take place and informing them that it would be streamed and encouraging them to participate in this viewing. I do want to let you know this presentation will be conducted somewhat differently than a typical shareholder meeting of a corporation. It will be different because I'm going to take great care to explain the history of this corporation from a governance and creation perspective. Accordingly, I will be referring to and I will be using technical and legal references in a presentation which are not typical of a shareholder meeting. In other words, the presentation will begin by describing the creation of the corporation and then will work its way up to present-day business activities, which is typical for a shareholder meeting, which some of you may be familiar with. So where did it begin? On April 11th, 2011, the Tribal Council approved CLO 2011-0421-09. The name of that ordinance was General Ordinance Governing Establishment of a Tribally Owned Corporation for the partnership with Ron Oxendine, Ord Fink, and Jason Long. This ordinance, in general terms, was the formal decision by the tribe to pursue 8A status and certification from the Small Business Administration. In addition, this ordinance set forth the framework for the tribe to, quote, collaborate with Ron Oxendine, Ord Fink, and Jason Long. This ordinance did not set forth a percentage of ownership for any company that was to later be created. In May 2011, LTH was created under North Carolina corporate law. For years, the board of directors of LTH only consisted of the persons and individuals from the executive branch of this government, which is the tribal chairman's branch. Under prior tribal administrations, the board of directors was made up of the tribal chairman, the tribal administrator, and the housing manager. Based on my review of corporate records and other information that I have considered, in the summer and fall of 2019, Chairman Godwin coordinated with the tribal council to reconstitute the board of directors of LTH. As a result of that collaboration, the current four-person board of directors was agreed upon, and it was put in place through formal action of the council and the chairman. The current makeup of the board of directors is set forth in the bylaws, as previously described, and it has 2 representatives from the legislative branch, which is the tribal council, and 2 representatives from the executive branch, which is the tribal chairman. Currently, the LTH board of directors is made up of the following individuals: the chairperson of the tribe, Mr. Harvey Godwin; the tribal administrator, Ms. Tammy Maynor; the speaker of the council, Mr. Ricky Burnett; and the treasurer of the council, Ms. Pam Hunt. These individuals serve in an ex officio capacity, which means they only serve if they're filling the positions that I previously mentioned. Their service is described in the bylaws of the corporation, and it complies with North Carolina General Statute 55-801, paren C and D of the North Carolina Business Corporations Act. The Board of Directors, to be clear, exercises all corporate powers, and they manage the business affairs of this corporation. As it relates to Ms. Tammy Maynor, she became a director on the LTH board effective September 18th in accordance with the LTH bylaws after Dr. Frida Porter vacated the LTH board of directors at the end of August 2020 as a result of her appointment as president of Lumbee Tribal Enterprises, LLC. As mentioned earlier, this event is taking place because of the LTH bylaws. These bylaws in general terms indicate that an annual meeting is to take place. Tonight's meeting is an in lieu of meeting, and in simple terms, that means it's occurring today, October 6th, instead of in the month of December, as is referenced in the bylaws. An in lieu of meeting is allowed under the bylaws. The LTH Board of Directors thought it best to hold this annual meeting as early as possible, since it was originally envisioned to occur during the same time period as the State of the Tribe Address, which, as you all know, happens traditionally during the first week of July during Lumbee homecoming. We had hoped the restrictions and social distancing necessities would have lifted by now, so tribal members could attend this event in person. Obviously, that did not occur, so the decision was made to move forward expeditiously and to carry out this meeting in a virtual manner, save the tribal council and the tribal chairperson who were invited to attend in accordance with the COVID restrictions related to no more than 25 persons in any space. As a way of background, and to make clear to some, Lumbee Tribal Holdings is the corporate parent. It's the holding company for a separate and distinct for-profit enterprise of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina. LTH is 100%. It is 100% tribally operated and owned. The 100 shares, and there are only 100 shares, of LTH are in the name of, quote, the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina. Accordingly, the interest of the shareholder, singular, shareholder, because it's the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina, which is a single entity, is vested in the tribal government itself. It is important for all of you to understand that Lumbee Tribe Enterprises was created around the same time, and in fact on the same day of Lumbee Tribe Holdings in 2011. There has been, or at least it's my belief, that there may have been some question about shareholders and shares. So I just want to mention a few things. This is going to be very technical, but for those that are interested, they'll want to hear this. Under the North Carolina Business Corporation Act, which I will refer to on a go-forward basis as the Act, the shareholder of a North Carolina business corporation is the person or persons in whose name the shares of the corporation are registered. The shares of LTH, the actual share itself, is in my protected custody. The shares, and that's my previous comment was in accordance with Chapter 55 of the statute, -1-40, paren 22. The shares are the units into which the proprietary interests of the corporation are divided. LTH, as I mentioned previously, are registered in the name of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina as it's presented and as it has been written on the share that I mentioned to previously. The Act further provides that, quote, a corporation, partnership, trust, or other entity. So among those things that I just mentioned, you should pay
close attention to the other entity. The Act further provides that, quote, a corporation, partnership, trust, estate, or other entity is identified as a single shareholder. That's in accordance with 55-1-42, paren A and paren 2. This company has been established under North Carolina, as I mentioned earlier, under North Carolina corporate law. So we follow, this tribal entity follows the rules of the state corporate law. We're going to talk later about how other tribes do that and how they may have other opportunities for which we currently do not. Accordingly, the Lumbee tribe, as the sole shareholder of each outstanding share of LTH, is entitled to exercise the rights of a shareholder with respect to each share. Under the Act, unless the Articles of Incorporation indicate otherwise, each outstanding share is entitled to one vote. I will tell you, the Articles of Incorporation, which are a public document, do not indicate otherwise. So it's silent. The Articles of Incorporation are silent. Once you look at the Articles of Incorporation on North Carolina corporate law, then you look at the bylaws. And that's what we've talked about so far and will continue to talk about. With all that being said, you should understand, under North Carolina corporate law, the right to control the policy and management of the corporation is vested in the board of directors. It's not vested in the tribal chairman. It's not vested in the tribal council. Now, you heard me mention earlier, both of those individuals or entities appoint two to the four-member board of directors. So in my opinion, from a layperson's point of view, they in fact are controlling what's happening with LTH, which is a requirement that we'll talk about later. The history of those shares is not as clear as you think it may be. I'm going to, throughout this presentation, when I speak of something that's factual, I'll let you know it's factual. When I'm giving you my opinion, I'll let you know it's my opinion. Fact, regarding the shares of LTH, I do want to clarify a couple of things. At one point in 2011, the 100 shares of LTH were in the name of Lumbee Nation Tribal Programs, Inc. In 2012, those 100 shares were transferred to Lumbee Land Development. In early 2014, the 100 shares were transferred from Lumbee Land Development to the, quote, Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina. Based on my review of the corporate documents and other information, this transfer was necessary because the corporate structure at the time did not meet the requirements of federal law in order to qualify for an 8A program participation. The transfer in the end, where they were put in the name of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina, cured that deficiency. From my review of the available documents and associated information, the SBA made clear to the tribe at the time that the only way they were going to approve the tribe's participation, in the 8A program would be if the shares were owned by the tribe itself or through its holding company, which is what the tribe opted to do, not another corporate entity. For example, LLD or Lumbee Nation programs. In October 2014, LTE was certified as an 8A participant in the SBA program. LTE is considered a privately held company, and it too is a separate legal entity. It's a limited liability company, also established under North Carolina corporate law, which operates independently from the tribal government as required by law. During the first 6 years, from 2011 to 2017 of their existence, LTE and LTH, there were little business activity occurring with either. It's my understanding the primary activities revolved during that time period around building infrastructure and developing business strategies. As previously mentioned, LTH because there seems to be some confusion about this. You're going to hear me repeat this. LTH is the parent and holding company for all the tribe's economic activities. Up until now, or a few months ago, those activities were solely being accomplished through Lumbee Tribe Enterprises, LLC, which I will, on a go-forward basis, refer to as LTE, in which LTH has a 60% ownership interest. LTH owns 60% of its first subsidiary, LTE. The remaining 40% is owned by Ron Oxendine, Ord Fink, and Jason Long. Recently, in May of this year, as part of the responsibilities that the LTH board asked me to take on, 2 new companies have been created. LITS, Lumbee IT Solutions, LLC, and L56, Lumbee 56 Construction, LLC. And as you may not know, the 56 and L56 relates to the Federal Lumbee Recognition Act of 1956. Both LITS and L56 are 100% owned by LTH. There are no other owners. Since its inception, LTE has had a board of directors and a corporate governance model, which was required by SBA years ago. As I've mentioned earlier, it acts independently from the council and somewhat from LTH. And that board oversees the long-term goals and strategies of that entity. The initial version of the LTE board structure was not approved by SBA, based on my review of documents and information that I've read. Among other things, the SBA determined that none of the minority members would be allowed to be voting directors, and none of them could serve as the president of LTE. Based on my review of records and associated information, several things were put in place to ensure, this is very important, to ensure LTE was not subject to negative control of these minority members, which is a requirement under federal law. Since its inception, the SBA has made clear to the LTE Board of Directors that it expects this company to be controlled and managed by the board, not an individual within the corporation, within the entity. The board in turn hires a president to carry out the strategic objectives that the board has set forth and certain delegations of authority that the board has granted him or her. Based on my review of the corporate documents, there were concerns about the stability and turnover of the LTE board when this idea first came about, which is partially why the board members of LTE were appointed and currently now serve for extended periods. It is true that in the initial operating agreement, and as it is written now in the current operating agreement of LTE, the board members on LTE are appointed for 15-year terms. They serve until they resign, retire, sometime God calls them home, or the board makes other decisions as it relates to that board member. The board itself, the board of directors, can remove a fellow board member. The current LTE board of directors is legally structured and viewed as the manager of LTE. The initial operating agreement of LTE had to be submitted and approved the SBA, as I mentioned previously, during the 8A application process, which is similar to the process that LITS and L56 have to follow. In addition, and because of this structure, the LTE board of directors is required to have personal security clearances. That's referred to as a PCL, at the same level as the FCL, That's a facility clearance level. For LTE, the FCL is top secret. The reason that is the case is because a number of the efforts that are being carried out by LTE are classified matters on behalf of federal agencies. As it relates to the negative control, and to avoid the negative control by any minority member of LTE, SBA, based on my review of the records and documents, made clear their expectations that the corporate office be established in Pembroke, which, as we all know, is the most appropriate location because this is where our tribal government is situated as we're sitting here this evening. Up until a few months ago, there were 4 officers of LTE as listed on the North Carolina Secretary of State's webpage. Of those 4, the 3 minority members served in 3 of those 4 positions. The 3 minority members, as they're referred to, and owners. All of those individuals live and pay taxes to states other than North Carolina. These 3 individuals filled the officer positions of secretary, assistant secretary, and treasurer of the company. Today, none of these minority members or owners serve as officers of the company, and none of them are involved in the day-to-day operation or management of the company. The current senior leaders of the company are predominantly Lumbee, and the entire 6-member LTE board of directors is Lumbee as well. As for control over the management and policy making of LTE, I want to talk and make sure the general tribal membership and the tribe council and other folks understand a few things related to those contracts that I briefly mentioned. At the beginning of this process, before I came along, based on my review of information, the board of directors of LTH at some point had to execute an exclusion resolution. Most recently, the LTH board of directors early this spring, after they asked me to come on board, executed a revised exclusion resolution, which in simple terms verifies to the federal government, the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency in particular, that the LTH board of directors is not going to, nor is it going to attempt to exert control over LTE in such a manner to impact its policies or management with regard to the execution of classified contracts. This is an important concept to understand, which is why the entire LTE board of directors either has or is in the process of obtaining security clearances at the same level as the FCL that I mentioned earlier. In addition, an exclusion resolution has been issued by the Lumbee Tribe Enterprises LLC Board of Directors regarding the 3 minority members and owners of LTE, because they too cannot impact the policies and management regarding the execution of classified contracts. Inside the LTE corporate structure, there are several positions and employees which must have security clearances to carry out their job responsibilities. The clearance process can take as little as 6 months to most recently as long as 18 months. That's traditionally, for defense contractors, one of the barriers that's put up, not intentionally, but it's a natural barrier for young people and non-prior military to come in to work for a defense contractor. So what is an 8A? The 8A program is a business development program designed to assist socially and economically disadvantaged small businesses, including tribally owned enterprises. As defined in the federal regulation, a tribally owned business concern is the word they use, concern, is any concern that is at least 51% owned by an Indian tribe. Listen to this next sentence because it's important to us because of our current recognition status. An Indian tribe is any Indian tribe, band, nation, or other organized group of community or community of Indians, including ANCs, the Alaska Native Corporations, which is recognized as eligible for special programs and services provided to the United States to Indians because of their status as Indians, or as recognized as such by the state in which the tribe, band, nation, or community resides. And as we all know, the Lumbee have been recognized by the state of North Carolina since the late 1800s. The 8A program, named for Section 8 of the Small Business Act, is designed to assist small disadvantaged businesses, including tribally owned businesses, to compete in the marketplace. It's designed to assist these entities in gaining access to federal markets. The primary focus of the program is to provide business development support through mentoring, program assistance, business counseling, training, financial assistance, surety bonding, which we will need at some point, as L56 will need, and other management and technical assistance to those firms. The ultimate objective of the 8A program is to prepare small disadvantaged firms for procurement and other business opportunities. How does that happen? It happens because 8As are eligible for award of what are referred to as sole source or set-aside contracts. The 8A program provides the market access and growth for tribal enterprises. So what is a sole source? What does that mean when you hear that? It means the purchasing agencies do not have to put that service and or product out for bid. They get to avoid that long bureaucratic process that is followed during a bidding process. And guess what? Effective March 17th of 2020, just a few months ago, the Department of Defense contracting officers won't have to issue justification or obtain approval to award sole source contracts under the SBA 8A program for awards up to $100 million. Let me read that again. Effective March of this year, DoD contracting officers will be able to award sole source contracts up to $100 million for tribal 8As, ANCs, and Native Hawaiian organizations. That's up previously from $22 million. As some of the council members may know, when we come over and brief the council on a quarterly basis, we brief you all on contracts that have been awarded. Normally you will hear us refer to the contract, or you would have heard us in the past say, the contract is for $22 million. So this $100 million federal regulation and law change is a big deal. This is very important to the development of LTH and our new subsidiaries, LITS and L56. Under the 8A program, Congress has granted tribes with unique rights under federal procurement law and processes. These rights provide federal agencies with a strong incentive to contract with tribal enterprises. One of the incentives I mentioned a few minutes ago was this whole bidding process. So they're encouraged to find qualified, competent tribal 8As, ANCs, and Native Hawaiian groups to award those contracts to. You can say tribes, which includes us, have special privileges, and there are numerous reasons for this policy approach by our government. However, and this is absolutely critical, especially for the council, a very important perspective in all of this is that the proceeds from tribally owned companies are used for the benefit of tribal membership rather than individual owners. So it's my understanding, in speaking with some of our folks that have been in LTE and others, and when I was a former contracting officer in the United States Air Force, contracting officers are making judgment calls. They're making decisions. They're authorized to do so because of their training, knowledge, and experience. LTE hears from contracting officers. They call us, and they want to know where the profits are going. In fact, this document right here is waiting for me to fill it out. This is referred to as the 8A Participant Benefits Report. That document has to be submitted by LTE by Dr. Porter in the next few weeks. Annually, she has to submit a report to the SBA. On that document, we have to disclose truthfully, which we always do, exactly what happened and how the profits were spent by the tribal government. We report that annually in writing. Government contracting officers ask us how the profits are spent. They're very interested in that. Because sometimes, to be quite candid with you, they would rather award a contract to a socioeconomically disabled entity like a tribal 8A instead of to an individual that's going to go out and buy a new Lamborghini or a Porsche. They have a heart just like many of you do. The SBA and the partner federal agencies expect our tribe to use these profits from the 8A businesses to build, sustain, and operate our communities. Those are not my words. Those are words from the Small Business Administration. Sustain and operate our communities for the betterment of education, healthcare, public works, and other community sustaining activities. And those are among the things on that document that we have to check and disclose. So, as it relates to this 8A opportunity, how long can an 8A business stay in a special program that has the potential to bring so much opportunity to entities and organizations like the Lumbee people? You can stay in this program, this 8A program. It's limited to 9 years, beginning from the date the firm is approved by the SBA for entry or certified as an 8A business. The first 4 years are considered and referred to as the developmental stage. The last 5 years are referred to as the transitional stage. We are in the equivalent of year 6. When you hit year 5, so let's use an example. So LTE last year had revenues of around $50 million. As we move to year 6, the government says, hey, LTE, we expect that 25% of your revenues must come from other than sole source opportunities. So the idea is, those first 4 years, you get your legs under you. You find your balance, you find your center, and you start thinking about how do you compete with folks that are not in the 8A program. How do you compete with the Corbin Eddings painting company that wants to do business at Fort Bragg as well, but perhaps Mr. Eddings has come out of the 8A program as a disabled veteran, and now he's out there getting it. The door doesn't stay open forever. The door is wide open for 4 years. Year 5, it's 15%. Year 6 is 25%, and it keeps going up 10%, 35, 40, 55. Joshua, what does that mean? That means for year 6, LTE, in my example, needs to be doing this year about $12.5 million in sole source, non-sole source contracts. LTE is not doing $12.5 million in non-sole source contracts. Doing about half that, a little more than half. So what happens? What happens when you don't meet those percentages? The phrase that we use and refer to it is called being benched. LTE right now is in the process of being benched. And those things that I talked to you earlier about, that SBA puts their arms around a small business and helps with business development plans, financing, that all those sources are what entities like 8A are supposed to be accessing. But those seeds have to be planted years ago. Not 2020. You got to be chasing that rabbit, and I'm not Hunter, in 2017 and 2018, because you know what's coming. So LTE's in the process of being benched for 6 months. So does that mean LTE's out of business? No. We're going to talk about that a little later. It means during that benching period, that contracting officer can call and award LTE a contract based on its 8A status. But LTE is still a small business. They're a whole nother separate category where the federal government contracting officers are trying to award contracts to those folks too, so they can get their legs up underneath them so they can become a Raytheon or Lockheed Martin or someone like that. LTE is going to be on bench for some time. The maximum length of time, 6 months. That's one of the challenges that the LTE Board of Directors and Dr. Frida Porter have to figure out. They are where they are. The way you get out of that is either you wait the obligatory time or you win contracts. So for example, just a few months ago, LTE won a contract on the West Coast that was a competitive contract that would have fallen into that category of competition, not sole source. Unfortunately, LTE didn't get to begin to work on that because there's a protest for the contract. But it's clear that you understand that concept because that'll be critical later when we talk about LITs and L56. You continue in the program and in both stages your continued participation is dependent on the firm's continual compliance with the business development agreement, which is the equivalent of a written contract, which I've reviewed, between the SBA and the tribal company, which is for us is LTE. And that sets forth expectations between the government and the entity. And it basically quotes federal law. It says you would do all these things and you would comply with all these things. The SBA district office monitors and measures the progress of the 8A company, and they've been measuring us for some time. We fall under the ambit of the Charlotte SBA office, who LTE, by the way, has a great relationship with. The SBA does this thorough annual review, so we disclose all kind of information to them. Everything that's taking place down at LTE, the SBA knows about it. All the finances, all of it goes to SBA. They get copies of all of it. They get our taxes. They see it all. They help us with business plan collaboration and systematic evaluations. And to answer a question that I've heard repeatedly, LTE is audited, just like the tribe is audited. An independent entity or person comes in and does an audit. That audit is reviewed and submitted by the firm. Depending on how much revenue you have, it can be within 90 days or 120 days once you go into the new calendar year. But to be clear, LTE is audited. That audit goes to the LTE Board of Directors. That audit report goes to the LTH Board of Directors for their review because they own 60% of LTE. Besides tribal eligibility requirements, there are business eligibility requirements that must be complied with as well. Those requirements focus on the legal structure of the tribal business, as I described earlier, and the size of the concern. Ownership rights, and here's that phrase again, control and management of the enterprise. Individual eligibility limitation and the potential for success. That's another phrase that you need to remember. Potential for success, because that relates to LITs and F-56. As for 8A business size matters, a tribally owned applicant must qualify as a small business concern, which we did, and then we choose and we designate what's referred to as the NAICS, North American Industrial Classification System, which LTE did some years ago, and which L-56 and LITs will have to do as well. In determining the size of the small business owned by the Indian tribe, the wholly owned business entity of the tribe and the firm size shall be determined independently. This is something that's special for tribes. It's determined independently without regard to the affiliation with the tribe. So the fact that the tribe receives 10, 12, $20 million from the federal government, or that the tribe receives funds some other way, that's not attributed to the 8A. They also don't affiliate the 8As themselves, the subsidiaries. So the fact that LTE is around last year a $49, $50 million revenue company, that's not attributed to LITs and L-56. When that application runs through the SBA 8A application process, the only thing that LITs and L-56 are going to have are what LTH comes up with. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. That's all possible as long as the SBA doesn't make a determination that there is a substantial unfair competitive advantage. They'll approve that approach. Earlier, I mentioned the phrase potential for success. And this relates to tribal 8As. It's a three-pronged test is what I refer to it. The first prong is what LTE followed a couple of years ago, in my opinion. The tribally owned concern must establish the potential for success by demonstrating that. Back in 2014, they had to demonstrate that, quote, it has been in business for at least 2 years. So LTE, as I told you, was established legally in 2011, and it started doing some stuff as a small business, not as an 8A. So it is starting to get its what under? Its legs. The second prong relates to an individual or individuals who will manage control of the business operations. But this third prong is where we need to make sure that the council and the LTH board and the tribal members themselves are on the same accord, because this is critical as it relates to LITs and L-56. The third prong is, quote, potential for success by demonstrating that the tribe, which is the holding company, has made a firm written commitment to support the operation of the applicant concerned, and that it has the financial ability to do so. So LTH, in order to get LITs up, in order to get L-56 off the ground like we all want them to, LTH has had to make a decision, which it did, and the board voted on unanimously a few months ago, to set aside funds to support the creation of LITs and L-56. And it's not just talk, because during that 8A application process, we're going to turn in that written document where LTH has pledged to do it. And they're going to ask for the bank records, and we're going to provide them, showing that it has a financial ability to do so. So LTH can't have $10 in the bank like maybe one of my kids, I won't call them by name. They've got to have money in the bank to demonstrate to SBA that it, quote, what, has the financial ability to do so. Now that's done a couple different ways. I'm going to explain, although this has already been disclosed to the council, unless the individual tribal members that may be listening tonight might not understand this concept, and perhaps some of the council members don't, so I'm going to explain it again. Approximately 2 months ago, the LTH Board of Directors had a long conversation about what it would take to get these businesses off the ground. I referred them to 13 CFR 124-109 parentheses 6, what I just read from you. And I turned to them and said, so what do you want me to do? And they said, Joshua, we've asked you to serve in this capacity. We'll think about buying you a sandwich later, but come up with a recommendation. And I did. And I came up with that recommendation much like Corbin Eddings would, or Mr. Chavis, or perhaps Ms. Hunt, by looking at what other people are doing. So over the course of 6 months, especially over the course of 6 months, not only have I been reading about fellow tribal 8A enterprises, I've been calling people, and I've been cold calling them. One of the individuals, and I hope he has the opportunity perhaps to hear about this, is a guy named Lance Morgan. Lance Morgan's part of the Ho-Chunk people. Lance Morgan is a lawyer. Lance Morgan, similar to me, although he serves as the CEO and president of the Ho-Chunks holding company. And I called and have called Lance some months ago, in addition to making contact with the Chickasaw Nation Industry, Cherokee folks out in Oklahoma. They have a very successful company. And I've done a lot of reading. I read a lot of tribal council meeting minutes from across the nation. And one of the things I've discovered is sometimes tribal 8As and business enterprises get off track, and all due candor. And based on my observation, and this is an example where I'm giving you my opinion, it gets off track when the folks that are playing different positions aren't reminded or don't recognize the position they're playing. I've mentioned to you words like exclusion resolution. I've told you that's required by federal law. I've mentioned to you that LTE and LTH are separate legal entities based on corporate law. The lawyer in me wants to tell you that anytime another entity starts controlling another entity, when something bad happens, plaintiff's attorneys like me start attempting to do what's called pierce the corporate veil. So if you have a little company, you're running a dump truck out at Chapel like your colleague Ted Woodell is. Ted has an accident on a work site, someone gets hurt, or someone dies. When that plaintiff attorney researches and does everything he or she can do about Ted Woodell, he's going to try, or she's going to try to find where the cash is and where the money is. And Ted Woodell or Lumbee Tribe Enterprises they can file all the paperwork with the Secretary of State they want to. But if they don't run that organization and that company as an independent company, and they let someone else start telling them who your president's going to be, I'm going to tell you what your budget is, I'm going to tell you what your salaries are, I'm going to decide which contracts, that other entity starts taking control of Ted Woodell dirt hauling or LTE. And when the bad thing happens, all those documents are going to be discoverable. And the lawyer is going to leap. He or she's going to, it's called piercing the corporate veil. And they're going to go where the money is. That's what lawyers do. And the truth of the matter is, as is the policy in the courts and the case law, the courts agree with that. If you start acting like you're running it, we're going to let you run it. You get all the pats on the back, but you get all the liability as well. My conversations with Mr. Morgan, you can Google this. You can read about Ho-Chunk Corporation. They're very successful. And in my opinion, it's similar to what we should hope to emulate in some regards. We should, in my opinion, in the interest of transparency, which is what I told you at the beginning this is all about, we've got to figure out where we want to go. And we is the Lumbee Tribal Holdings Board, which has representation from the chairman and the council, what it is we want to do. We know what we've been doing with LTE, a very successful company, in my opinion, and the business records support that, and the profits show that. But we have to decide where we want to go. So some strategic decisions have been made and will need to be made by LTH. And the council and the chairman and the tribal members themselves are going to have to be educated, and that's part of what tonight is to try to bring everybody up to speed from what happened starting in 2011. So these annual meetings start taking place annually, like the board asked me to do a few months ago. They said, Joshua, if the bylaw says we're supposed to do it, we want you to get it done. And that's the reason we're here. So why are you harping on that, Joshua? Because the LTH Board of Directors a few months ago voted on a resolution which has been disclosed to the council via the quarterly reports, that it was going to set aside 70% of the cash that comes to it from LTE. Let me say that again. The LTH Board of Directors made the decision some months ago to set aside 70% of the available cash that comes to it currently only from LTE. Why? For the purpose of meeting the requirements that I talked to you a few minutes ago about having the ability to financially support these two new companies during the 8A application process. It is not so LTH can start going out and spending money and building things and buying things. It's so LITS and L56 have the seed money to get off the ground. So Joshua, how in the world did LTE get started? I don't know of any money that the tribe invested. I don't know of any money either, based on all records I reviewed, that LTE borrowed money to the tune of $750,000. That money was borrowed from one of the minority member owners. That money is being paid back. As of last year, the amount that was due to that, the individual at the end of the audit year was $430,000. I will tell you, and to make this clear, the LTE Board of Directors in the last few weeks voted and directed Dr. Frida Porter to take any and all steps necessary to pay off that note in the next 2 months. And they're able to do that because of the financial forecast of LTE. So that's money that's coming where? From off the top. But by the end of this calendar year, LTE is not going to owe any money. I'm telling you that for a couple reasons. One, to let you know that as it relates to that money that was borrowed, it's going to be zero unless some calamity happens before the end of the year, which is possible. But I'm also telling you that so you can get a general understanding of how much money it takes to start a business. So for LTE, years ago, before all the price increases, it was $750,000. For LITS, which is going to be an IT company, which is somewhat similar to LTE, and L56, which is a construction company, which there's going to be costs that we've never seen before because of the bonding capacity, the surety stuff that I briefly mentioned. That's going to be a lot of money. That's going to be more money. And that's part of the reason that the LTH Board of Directors did what? Had the foresight to say, I've got to save for Christmas, just like all of you all are doing right now to buy your child or grandchildren that special things December. There are other tribes that I won't tell you which ones, that they do things like they start the 8A, and for the first 5 years, guess how much money goes back to their council? Zero. So it would be just like Ricky Burnett starting a landscaping business. And he sets up a separate business, and he says to himself, I'm going to be successful. And I'm not going to take salary. I'm not going to pay myself because I'm planning this thing for the long haul. I want it to be successful 4 or 5 years ago, so I know I got to sacrifice now. These other tribes that we're emulating or using as benchmarks, they've done it. I've given you one example. There's other tribes where they only pass through 20% of the cash that comes to them. LTH is passing through 30%. I will tell you and folks that are online or the council themselves can do your own review. Even with that reduced, that number, 30%, that exceeds our peers. That exceeds peers that are federally recognized tribes. Here's a few things before we start talking about financing. And I tried to warn you all that this was going to go long, but this is a tremendous amount of information, and I think it's pertinent. And the speaker in the recent conversations told me, Joshua, please put it all out there. Please put it all out there for transparency purposes. Please put it out there because this thing is bigger than any of us. This is not about Joshua Malcolm or Miss Chavis in your neighborhood. It's about Mr. Chavis's grandchildren. It's about Corbin's grandchildren and about our community. You should know there are certain things, as I mentioned to you earlier, a state-recognized tribe is eligible for the 8A program. There are a number of things that we're not eligible for. For example, the Indian Incentive Program, based on Section 504 of the Indian Financing Act of 1974, provides a payment of 5% in the amount of a subcontract for a tribally owned organization when it's authorized under the terms of that contract. So are we eligible for that? No. If you're a federally recognized tribe, they are eligible for it. So if we're competing with the Ho-Chunk, the Chickasaw, whoever else, same contract, we want to be a sub on it. That prime, and this is related to subcontract, that prime contractor is looking around choosing who he wants to be his partner or she. So he can choose a federally recognized AA or ANC, or he can choose Lumbee. Now, I see Mr. Chavis. I saw him this weekend working. That's a working man. And I stopped and exchanged some pleasantries with him. And when I walked away, I said to myself, that's the same man that I saw 10 or 15 years working, providing for his family. And he's seeking to reward himself and I assume his family under God's grace. But if you're running the prime, you're not going to give away 5%. You're going to get all the money you can because that makes the most what? Makes the most business sense. So that's a barrier against LTE. It'll be a barrier for 56. It'll be a barrier for Lips from Jump Street. But the biggest barrier relates to the Indian Reorganization Act. So I know we've all been ecstatic, including my 11-year-old son Rivers and Slade, who's 7, because they understand that the Lumbee are not full federally recognized. And I've talked with them about the recent decision where the Lumbee Recognition Act came out of the Natural Resources, and it's been supported by our bipartisan congressional delegation. But the truth of the matter is, federally recognized tribes conduct their commercial enterprises and activities through federally chartered corporations. They're referred to as Section 17 organizations, the Ho-Chunk, the Chickasaw, and other folks. Those tribal corporations formed under Section 17 of the IRA have the same tax status as the tribe itself. So what does that mean, Joshua? Federally recognized tribes don't pay federal taxes for the things that take place on their reservations. The Section 17 rules or regulations go further, and it says that these organizations have the same tax status as a tribe. They're not subject to federal income taxes for the income derived on or off the reservation. On or off the reservation as far as activities. In 2019 alone, that would have reaped LTH an additional $635,000. $505,000 in the federal Fed, $120,000 in state taxes. We pay state taxes all over the place. A majority of our state taxes go to Virginia because that's the majority of where our activities take place. The implications related to full federal recognition of the Lumbee is more than about health care, access to BIA services. It directly relates to our economic enterprise. And I will say, and I'll talk about this later, despite what I've only talked to you about related to two barriers. Federal tax rate for when the the money comes from LTE up to LTH. LTE doesn't pay taxes. That money floats up to the members, 3 minority members and the big member, LTH. They pay their taxes. When that money floats up, the Ho-Chunk, they don't pay it. Chickasaw don't pay it. All these other federal Cherokee Nation industries out of Oklahoma don't pay it. So later, when I start talking about returns, I'm going to give you some specific examples, despite the fact that LTH is paying in excess of 20% federal taxes, despite the fact that we're paying state taxes, we still return more money to our council than those organizations. Now, let me say that again. All the folks that are listening to this online that really enjoy researching things, the information's out there. LTE and LTH, the money that comes to LTH, based on the past, what I'll refer to as distributions that go up, exceed the money from federally recognized tribal AAs around us, across this country. I want to talk for a minute and knock the edge off a few things where there's some misunderstanding. We often, LTE, in the past, in my opinion, as we're speaking candid with each other, have not done the best job of making sure the council and our tribal members understand what it means for LTE to win a contract. They'll put a notice out on Facebook or LinkedIn, and it'll say in big dark letters, LTE wins $22 million contract. And I know there's folks in the community that have gone through and they look at these federal available websites, they look at these past postings, and they add it up. And they say, good gracious, LTE has $600 million worth of contracts they're executing. The way the contracts come in primarily to LTE are through what are referred to as IDIQs, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. And what does that mean? That means that there's indefinite quantity, indefinite, not definite. You don't know if they want one person working for Department of Homeland Security in Atlanta or whether they want 30. All you know is you got an IDIQ contract that has a maximum. Earlier I talked about, before the law changed earlier this year, the maximum was what? 22 million. Now it's 100 million. But regardless, you get an indefinite quantity of services for a fixed period of time, traditionally 5 years, and you get precise quantities of the service above and the minimum required during the contract period. So you'll see on our website, if you go back, where a few years ago in 2017, if you Google it, you can Google Lumbee Tribe Enterprises MHTV. And if you find the announcement, it'll say the Lumbee Tribe LTE won a contract for $22 million. That was 2017. We're 3 years into it. We got 16 months to go. Now some folks think, y'all collected $22 million off that contract. Where's the money? Why hadn't the money come to the tribe? I want to see it. Well, they don't know that the contracting officer or the federal agency, in that case the United States Marine Corps, only awarded us task orders that amount to $3 million. So there's a disconnect. Let me go over that again. LTE and similar agents, entities, not just LTE, anybody that's doing federal contracting, will win an IDIQ. That sets what I'll refer to as a ceiling. But then it's up to that federal agency to decide, I need your help training 10 individuals in Jordan, not 100. COVID hits, you're not training anybody for 6 months. But you have your people there ready, but you only need one there because everybody's standing in their huts and their houses just like you guys in the United States. So the task orders don't what? They don't come. That has been confusing our people, our tribal members and our council members. As a way to mitigate that future confusion, we will continue as an entity to let the world know about our successes. But we're going to make clear in layman terms what these contract awards actually mean so that can knock the edge off of people being confused. In addition, LTE has most recently, Camp Pendleton, been awarded what's called a MATOC, M-A-T-O-C. That's a multiple award task order contract. It's similar to an IDIQ, but here's the distinction. Multiple awardees, so not just the LTE, it's LTE, it's Chavis Enterprises, it's Eddings Enterprises. They all get over that initial barrier. Multiple awardees are chosen to provide services within the predefined dollar amount. And in that case, it's called a MCTISA contract. To the best of my memory, without looking at it, I think the maximum ceiling is $46 million. It can go above 22, that I mentioned earlier, but the contracting officer has to justify it. So we won a MATOC contract, but we're only a part of other awardees. Then what happens, the awardees themselves create a pool of contractors who then have to do what? They have to compete with each other. So the federal agency says, I'm going to narrow it down to 5. You guys are MATOCs. You won the MATOC award, and the number's not right. That's what happened at Camp Pendleton. We entered that awardee pool, and then they started the process to start moving toward the task orders, and then there was a protest filed. But even if that protest wasn't filed, which may be resolved as early as December, we still got to compete. So our people, the tribal council and our tribal members and other people in this great community think LTE's got a $46 million contract. Money in the bank, they're getting, $5 million a month. I'm taking great care to explain that because it's an example of where we have got to send clearer messages, and it also should let you know this is a very complex enterprise. Those task orders, we wait for those. So they'll get an email, they'll get a phone call. So for an example, LTE, as part of its ATA contract, which is the largest contract IDIQ we have under effort, it's about $200 million. The U.S. Department of State. Based on my review of records and talking with folks, the Lumbee Tribe Enterprises was selected for that contract because the tribal administration decided to work with our partners downtown across the track at UNCP and to have an economic development enterprise or activity. An individual from the State Department who's originally from North Carolina, not too far from where we live, came and he met our people. And he was, from what I understand, he was surprised to learn about LTE. And so when he went back to Washington, based on all the activities and things that he had heard about LTE, he decided with his folks to evaluate LTE's potential to do that contract. And LTE was awarded that contract. $200 million. Right now, that's what we're executing. That's the IDIQ over that 5-year time period. But we're waiting for task orders. So as an example of that task order, as you all know, our great friend and former colleague, Mr. Terry Hunt, at the beginning of this year was over representing LTE in Nairobi, related to a contract that our LTE, that our company has. That task order had been awarded to LTE, and he went over with another individual, cutting the ribbon, just like we do when the university starts a great project, or the town or the tribe does. But after that began, the federal agency said, hold up, we've got a different idea. We need to talk with our partner country, in that case Kenya, because we're not on the same accord. We need to modify that. So LTE basically, in simple terms, gets notified, you're not going to begin the task order, it's on hold. So that's an example of where LTE had projected to have this additional revenue coming in this year, and I'll talk about 2020 in a minute, where it just got taken off the table. It's not guaranteed until you begin. So we de-escalated. We had hired a guy to be the program camp manager or some things like that. And basically we're on hold until the federal government does what? Calls us and then sends an email and says that particular task order to build that particular project or to outfit it or support it is back on the front plate. So that's an example of where you're waiting for a task order and we don't control the outcome as it relates to that. So as we put behind us this perhaps misunderstanding related to what types of contracts LTE has been awarded, it's important, in my opinion, to put that in the pocket as we start thinking about LITs and L56. So I mentioned a few moments ago that the LTH board has taken necessary and appropriate action and steps to meet the intent of the tribal council's expressed intent as found in CLLR 2020-0416-01. And that resolution was titled Lumbee Tribe Holdings, Inc., New Business Development. And specifically, that resolution, which was passed unanimously by the council, told the world and told our members, and more importantly, told LTH that they fully supported, quote, their idea to create jobs and small business opportunities for our skilled, talented, and committed tribal members living in our territory as it decides which contracts and business opportunities to pursue. That resolution also makes clear that this is about creating economic benefits for the tribe. In order for the LTH entity to meet those expectations, it had to develop a plan, as I described earlier, to finance the new business opportunities. Accordingly, the LTH Board of Directors passed that resolution that I described unanimously, which is in our corporate documents, to set aside funds for these new things. As we shift to a discussion to talk about finances, I want to let the tribal members know, the council members already know this, but for tribal members, you need to know that the Lumbee Tribal Council passed an ordinance a few months ago related to LTH. The council and the chairman represent the government, who own 100% of LTH. They set forth in that a quarterly reporting requirement. My presentation tonight at the shareholders meeting is not a quarterly report on finances. That's why you all didn't get an income statement that you normally get at your quarterly meetings. You didn't get a list of contracts. There's 6 things that you guys have in that resolution or ordinance that you all know, that the tribal members may not know, that we submit to you all first in writing, and then LTH selects someone to come and do an oral report. For the tribal members, you need to understand that has happened twice And that's how we keep the Tribal Council, through the Economic Development Committee, informed of the business activities of Lumbee Tribe Holdings, which currently only has one subsidiary that's doing any work, which is LTE. So it's really a report about LTE. For the LTH, as it relates to finances, after nearly 6 years of very little financial activity, LTE's revenues have grown in the past 3 years to almost $50 million. Last year I said it was 49. It's round. We'll round these numbers to 50. Reporting net profits of over $4 million for the most recent audited fiscal year. They're not making the numbers up down the street. They can, but then they get audited. These are audited numbers. As a result, LTE has been able to distribute almost $5 million to its 4 members, LTH and the 3 minority members, one of which owns 20% and the other 2 own 10%, with over $2.9 million being distributed to LTH over the past 3 years. But here's the get. There's always a catch. Over half of the amount of the distributions have gone to where? Taxes. So let me say that again. In ballpark numbers, over the last 3 years, LTH has received from the activities of LTE approximately $2.9 million. Of that approximately $2.9 million, half of it has gone to pay federal taxes and state taxes. Primarily the state that money goes to is Virginia. And that's the second or third time I've mentioned Virginia, and I'm going to wrap back around to that when we talk about LITs and L56. The remaining amount after the taxes has been distributed to the tribe or is being made available to start what? The new 8A companies that the Tribal Council told LTH you wanted them to get started. And that's what they've done. That's what they're attempting to do. Now, earlier I mentioned this, but I just want to be clear. When comparing the performance to other federally recognized, full federally recognized Tribal 8A businesses and their models, LTE, in the examples that I did, we're about a fourth or a fifth of the size. But we have consistently reported higher profit margins for the past 3 years. And for those folks listening, profits come after taxes. So these federally recognized tribes aren't paying any federal taxes and aren't paying any state, but LTE through LTH is still pushing up more money. I'm not here to answer why that's happening for other folks. I'm here to let you know we're benchmarking our activities to figure out whether we're doing a good job on behalf of who? Our tribal members. Not about ourselves, but it's on behalf of our tribal members. As it relates to the LTE board, it is important to note that there are 6 voting members of that board of directors, and it has never, the LTE board of directors has never received any compensation or reimbursement for any of its work. They don't get a monthly stipend. They don't get mileage. They get emails from me every 2 weeks saying, I need you to come together for an emergency meeting. They meet formally approximately every 6 weeks for at least 2.5 hours during every meeting. Sometimes those meetings last in excess of 5 hours. The meetings that I refer to are not inclusive of things like the unbelievable personal effect and the devastation on our entity that occurred subsequent to Mr. Terry's demise. It does not include the time the board recently spent to conduct a national search that resulted in the hiring of Dr. Frida Marie Porter, she doesn't like me saying M, Marie, who's highly qualified to fill the position of the president. Another misconception that's not on my prepared notes that I want to go ahead and address is the individual that's leading these organizations in accordance with federal law is required to be the most highly compensated individual in that organization. Let me say that again. With these type entities, the federal government has recognized that there may be some unscrupulous people. This is my opinion of why it was put in place. There may be some unscrupulous business people or others that may want to find a straw person, straw man, straw woman, and put her in the seat and use perhaps her veteran status, or the fact that she's a woman, or the fact that she's an American Indian, or the fact that she falls into one of those other categories. And they put her in the seat, or put him in the seat, and put him in the back office and say, no, we're going to pay you about a quarter. We're going to pay you about a quarter of the going rate. But all my friends, we're going to pay them the top rates. That's not allowed. That's not Joshua's rule. That's my interpretation of what the federal rules require. And LTE and LTH is going to comply with the federal rules, at least as long as I continue to provide advice to LTE. And all I can do is provide advice. It's up for that entity to make the decision. Before I start talking about my final thoughts, I want to make it clear to folks on the phone, some of the tribal council members, because of COVID situation, were asked, which is similar to what's happening this week. There's a shareholders meeting, if you don't know, taking place right down the road with our friends down at LREMC. They followed a similar process. They submitted questions that are going to be answered at the equivalent of their shareholders meeting. Earlier today, or tonight, right before the meeting, I received questions that have been submitted, from what I understand, from tribal council members and perhaps others. I've reviewed those questions, and I think in my comments tonight, I've answered most of those questions. If I've not answered the question, it's because I'm not going to answer it. There are some things, as I mentioned to you, related to these private corporations that are not public. We don't run a list of the salaries of the amount of money that people are paid down at LTE. We don't do that. We're a privately held corporation. We don't do that. The board can decide to do that, but if they came up with that idea, I would give them legal advice not to do that. So, one or two of the council members asked, so what does it look like, Joshua, in your opinion? Board of Directors, LTH Board of Directors, where are we going? What is this all about? Where do I see, and where does the LTH Board of Directors see, based on my conversation, where do we see things in the next 5 years? I see an organization that has the potential to transform our community through economic development. I see an organization that is on the cusp of creating some meaningful opportunities for our tribal members and others. Tribal members and others. Our friends that are not tribal members, that live in the same community and go to the same schools as your kids and my kids. As the tribe becomes successful, the entire community becomes successful, because those dollars will turn over in our community right here in southeastern North Carolina. If we collectively do this right, we can control our own future without having to beg and plead and say, Mother, may I? It's up to us. It's up to us as to how well or not so well we run this business. We will not be dependent upon others. In other words, our business efforts can yield tremendous outcomes if these business enterprises are put in a position, LITS, 56, and LTE. Now, I don't want to leave any false impression with anybody tonight, because I know there's some people that think because LTE is being benched that the business is done with. That's not true. Let me make that clear. LTE is in business. It has contracts that it's only, in some cases, 1 year into. I mentioned the State Department ATA contract. They've just started the second year of what? 5. I told you it's a $200 million IDIQ. So just on that one contract, and we've got, I'd have to ask Dr. Porter, I didn't today, 13, 14 contracts. Believe it or not, little old LTE, headquartered in Pembroke, North Carolina, in the last few months won a contract in the country of Azerbaijan. You've probably heard about Azerbaijan in the last couple of weeks because of what's happening. They're in a dogfight with their friends, Armenia. And there are people representing you in Azerbaijan today. Think about telling that story to your children, your grandchildren. Think about taking that globe out and explaining to them that there are people overseas right now in Afghanistan, in Azerbaijan, in South Korea, all over the world, wearing a shirt that has the Lumbee Tribe Enterprises logo on it, which is the same or similar to the same logo that represents our tribe. LTE is in business, and it's going to stay in business. LTE right now has about 120 employees. Most of LTE's employees are in Stafford, Virginia, if you compare it to Pembroke. There are about 7 or 8 folks here. I mentioned to you earlier, SBA made it clear that this Indian-owned enterprise should be where at? In the Indian community. So that's where the president is. That's where the director of HR is. That's where the FSO is. That's where there's an accounting person. That's where the lawyer is. Contracts person. Today there was an individual that showed up today who's our interim vice president for operations. He's going to be here today and tomorrow. Work's being done right down here off Candy Park Road. It's happening around the world, folks. And it's positive stuff. It's very positive stuff. As it relates to LITS and L56, we've got to get them. We, LTH, is in the process of lifting them up. I'm assisting LTH right now to the extent that they've asked for my assistance. And I'll continue to do so until they say, we've got it, Joshua. We're going to do it a different way. I've agreed to do that because that's how much I've agreed to do that, and I'm going to keep doing it. We have the ability to yield tremendous outcomes if these business entities are put in a position to grow and thrive in the next 2 to 3 years. You're going to see an LTH corporate structure. Right now, there's a 4-member board, and there's Joshua, who's helping out on a part-time basis. What will that look like? It's going to look like when LITS and that contract that I talked to you that LTE had won out in California, well, guess who was a sub on it? Guess who is a sub? LITS. So when that protest gets resolved, LITS is going to start its first contract under effort, which right now it's just a little company with a few $100 in the bank, but the LTH board knows we got to fund them. So we've done our part, and let's talk about that for a minute. LTE, the board voted approximately 6 weeks ago and directed Freda Porter to take any and all steps necessary to support the growth and development of L56 and LITS. And they made clear to her they expect her to use the expertise and anything else she can that's in LTE, because there's a lot of expertise. There's 100+ employees. Many of them are retired military. Over 50% of them are retired military. We have a diversified group of individuals. They said to her, Freda, you better put everything on the table because we expect LITS and L56 to be successful. And what makes this is incredible, as opposed to an individual owning an 8A, what the vernacular is, we're a super 8A. So what that means is LTE, which currently exists, LITS, L56, in my words, you can stack them. Each of them are going to step on that 9-year road. But what's going to happen with LITS and L56, certainly as long as I'm involved in it and the extent that I can affect it, is they're going to do a much better job from Jump Street of ensuring that they're not solely focusing on sole source contracts. Because this is not a short-term game. This is not a short-term plan. As I mentioned earlier, in my opinion,
This has the opportunity to change this community. I know I've gone long, but I want to talk to you about what's possible. The Ho-Chunk. Everybody listening tonight, including my good friend Mr. Moore from Prospect, if you're listening, or if any of his family members are listening, I want you to tell Mr. Moore to Google Ho-Chunk Farms. Ho-Chunk Farms, their holdings company knew they needed to fill a gap among their tribal members. They needed to fill a gap related to people that do run cattle and people that do row crops. So guess what they've got? They've got a whole company that's related to agricultural related activities. Now what's our history here in southeastern North Carolina? The golden leaf, the corn, Mr. Roger Oxendine down there toward Roland, and people like Mr. Oxendine, we know we've got that expertise in this community. But it's going to be up to the LTH board of trying to thread that needle. Because there's a difference between having a priority related to making as much money as you can. Just make the money. Because if all we want to do is make money, we may never employ people from our community. And that's not what LITS and L56 are envisioned to be. Mr. Lowry, fellow council member, one of the questions I got from him, I think, is where's this thing going in 10 or more years? Where it's going is unlimited. Where it's going is there's got to be a strategic planning process that starts with the LTH board and is decided upon by the LTH board with impact from the tribal council members and feedback from the experts in our community like Mr. Moore or Roger Oxendine or maybe somebody in the construction business that's done it their entire life, Mr. Cummins out from Union Chapel, that knows the deal. He knows how to run a successful construction company. You know who I'm referring to. That's what it's going to take. And if you go and use our friends, the Ho-Chunk as an example, you can see what they've decided to do is they have divisions. So they've got folks in the D.C. area similar to the way we have folks in Stafford. And they have a division called All Native Group. And they're up there executing federal contracts. Right there in the D.C. Metroplex or whatever they call it. But guess what they also have? They have enterprises back home. They started a car lot. Guess why? Because they realized that the tribal members weren't getting a fair shake. So they recognized that was a gap that they needed to fill with their tribal members. I am not suggesting that LTH needs to start a car lot. I'm using that as an example of what it takes to make strategic decisions on a go-forward basis, if that makes sense. So that's, Mr. Jared and other folks, what's this going to look like? It really is up to what we think we can make it, what we want to make it. There will be a corporate structure. The Lumbee Tribe Holdings Board of Directors in principle acknowledges and understands that what will happen, I mentioned earlier LTE. LTE has an FSO. LTE has finance people. LTE has business development people. When they asked for my recommendation, what I told them it was going to be a shared services model. Shared services, what do you mean? At the corporate level, you may have all the accounting people. You may have all the business development people. Because in those little silos, LTE, L56, and LITS, you don't want business development people running against each other when they call on the folks at Shaw or they go up to visit the folks at Fort Bragg. You've got to have some marching orders. And in my comments, I put the word, stay in your lane. You want people in their lane so there's no what? Crossover. That's the way I see it, Mr. Lowry and the other folks that ask about that. LTH will have a corporate structure. There'll be a CEO and president. There'll be folks working in back office positions, perhaps like what I've described. I think it's going to be very easy for business development and business folks, accounting folks to be part of that. And they'll be making the call where these efforts are made. I do think that's what has to occur, or we're not going to be successful collectively. We're not going to be successful unless we come up with some strategic goals and we clearly delineate
what it means to pursue those things. I want to take a moment and show a couple of things here. These are a couple of slides. It's nothing fancy, but it should give you a sense of what's happening. Hold on one second. These slides represent some photos that further explained our tribal members and our council members, because the threshold matter for which I said we were here to have this discussion tonight, and technically for it to serve as a shareholder meeting, was the whole issue related to transparency. So everybody knew what was going on. So I'm going to show a couple of slides here. I'm not fancy enough to have a video. Lumbee Tribe Holdings, Inc. That's just the beginning slide. Ground-based air defense. Ground-based air defense is an example of a contract that we're executing right now on behalf of the United States Marine Corps. And it's a competitive win. It's not a sole source. It's a competitive win. And what's happening with this contract is every day, LTE and folks associated with LTE are going out, I won't call them what we used to in the Air Force, smart Marines, I'll call them that. Those are Marines that are sitting in a class getting instruction on what this weapon system's capabilities are. The weapon system is on top of that fancy new Humvee. That's showing them going through training, but it's showing you that we're doing things related to Marine Corps. That's them doing other things related to GBAD. That's called GBAD Net and GBAD E&L, Engineering and Logistics. So this isn't just like putting the air in tires and keeping the gas going, changing the air filter. This is teaching people. This is training young warriors how to deploy a weapon system around the world. And that's associated with the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. That's associated with you. What in the world? Who is that fella? That's an example of somebody that's right here from this community who does not work for LTE, but he works for an LTE subcontractor. He lives up in the Raleigh area, Mr. Brewington. He works on the GBAD contract. And that's an example. Mr. Brewington is an example. I think he graduated from West Robinson, in between us, probably, Mr. Eddins. He's an example of somebody, when I talked about those dollars turning over, of what we're trying to do with LITS and L56. Because the Lumbee Tribe Holdings and the council has made clear, and LTH board has made clear, as it relates to LITS and as it relates to L56, we expect our people to be put to work. So we will continue to execute contracts in Florida and Virginia, but the goal is to execute contracts. The Corps of Engineers toward Wilmington, our people, as y'all know, they'll drive from here to Shaw Air Force Base. They'll leave Pembroke. You see them getting coffee. They'll drive to Shaw and come back in the evening. There's unbelievable potential at Fort Bragg. Right now, LTE is only executing one contract. So that's an example in that strategic planning process. We have to identify, we have to bring on board with LITS, SME, subject matter experts who understand the Army and can help us walk in the door, or at least get an opportunity to sit down and tell them what's unique about the subsidiaries of LTH. And I've explained one thing that makes us unique is what? Those folks at Fort Bragg, they know about the Lumbee. They know about us. Last year I looked at their award information, contracting information. LITS and L56 hopefully will also be hub zone qualified. 8A qualified, hub zone qualified, small business. Now to be hub zone qualified, you have to have 30 or 35% of those individuals have to live in counties like Robinson and Hoke, not the fancy counties like Meck and Wake. So that's another category with these two new companies that we hope will help us get in the door. Last year, SOCOM had a goal of awarding 3% of their contracts to hub zone companies. Guess what percent they met? Zero. Zero, based on the information that was shared with us in a phone call 3 or 4 weeks ago. So there, I use that to tell you there's opportunities. We just got to get it going. This is the Joint Afghan Training Center. We operate that center. We don't do what Blackwater does. We don't have, we're not guardian ambassadors and things like that. We're running facilities. That's primarily the NAICS code for LTE. It's basically facility maintenance. That's our primary NAICS code. This is an example of what's happening over there. We're maintaining the JTAC with the support. We're making sure that things stay in place. They're facilitating the requirements, project management, operations, and support. We're running these facilities. That's an example of a demolition range, small arms range. So it's LTE people or our subcontractors, because we partner with people. Sometimes you have to get that subject matter expertise to win these things. That's an example. I'm dealing with an issue right now related to interpreters. So you have an American or one of our partner countries working there, and beside him is someone that can speak what? Kurdish or Afghani or Farsi. This is an example of a crisis response team course. This is a HESCO. Everybody know what a HESCO is? HESCO barrier. These things that keep our Marines and military members safe. That's additional students. These are some of our partners. The Marine Corps, the Army. We're going to change this. You don't see who up there. You don't see the Air Force up there. We're not doing any work on behalf of the Air Force right now. Most of the folks that are in LTE primarily have been Marines. And so that's one of the things. Strategically, you have to make those kind of decisions up front. Nothing wrong with what LTE did. They decided to focus on that and use the ideas or relationship they had to do that. So this is the Joshua, and I'm going to be quiet. You all should know every night when you put your child to bed and you speak to your grandson, there are individuals operating on behalf of the United States of America around the world in harm's way. It's my understanding over the last week or so, 2,800 members of the North Carolina Army National Guard have or in the process of returning to North Carolina after serving overseas in the Middle East. Those military members, while they're in deployment status, much like when I was deployed, are supported by civilians, DOD civilians, but there's a lot of contractors. And that's what our tribal members should understand. That's what we're doing. We're supporting war fighters. We're supporting the federal government to execute this country's geopolitical objectives around the globe. And LTE has done a very good job of that. And what we hope will occur with LITS and L56 is that we'll be able to establish additional partnerships with new federal agencies to continue doing those kind of things. Those 2,800 members, I know my son's not watching tonight. I've got a son who serves in the military, who was ordered active duty some months ago, who was ordered to one of these places where bad things happen. Those family members that we all see on social media, your brothers and sisters, my daddy, your parents, that's what LTE is doing every day for the military and with other federal agencies. As I close this out, this meeting has been all about the shareholders meeting. Everything that I sent out prior to this meeting was in accordance with this governing document. To bring this thing full circle, LTH is formulated by articles of incorporation that were put into effect in 2011. This bylaws of this four-member board is the guiding document. Among the other important things people should remember tonight, there's 100 shares in LTH. All of those shares are in the name of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. The shareholders' interests are represented by the tribal government. I did not say the tribal council. I said the tribal government represented, which is made up by the council, the legislative branch, and the executive branch, the chairman. All of those shares all get voted, if they are ever voted, in one vote. It's not divided by 60 people or 60,000 people. It's one shareholder. A lot of folks, I think, will have some difficulty understanding that in some regard because they may own a little Lockheed or a little, I don't know, Ford before it went bankrupt. That's the way this has been set up. The bylaws and decisions between the council and the chairman has vested the authority related to the operation of this Inc. corporation into the four-member board of directors. If you try to compare LTH to other tribes across the nation, you're going to see, depending on how many tribes you look at, you're going to see that many different variations. Some tribes, the tribe comes together and votes on a portion of the directors. Some tribes, there's no voting. In this case, where we are, is this four-member board of directors has been put in place to oversee the business operations of this corporation. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the time tonight. And Chairman Godwin, I assume you're listening, and the entire tribal council. I've tried my best to carry out the request of the Lumbee Tribe Holdings Board of Directors. I'm not here speaking in my personal capacity. I'm here speaking on behalf of the Board of Directors of LTH. And that concludes my remarks. Is there anything that I need to respond to, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker? Anything else? I'll tell you, so it's not a surprise, at some point, if I could continue this capacity, and to make clear, I am not the attorney for LTH. That would be a conflict. I can't be the attorney for LTH and the attorney for LTE. I serve on the state bar. I sanction and part of holding our other attorneys accountable. Attorneys shouldn't be in conflict situations. I'm very cognizant of the potential conflict, and I recognized that months ago, and I am not conflicted as it relates to that. LTH, when it seeks legal advice, although I'm a lawyer and have certainly strong opinions, if it's a legal issue, we consult and receive outside legal advice. As the council members may recall in some of the meeting minutes that were being turned over, LTH got outside legal advice as it related to Dr. Porter continuing on the LTH board while she was interim president of LTE. That's a great example of something y'all have seen in black and white. With that being said, I will be making a recommendation at some point in the future that the LTH board change or update the bylaws to make this annual shareholder meeting to specify that it take place in the month of July, maybe plus or minus 5 days, because y'all know we moved that sometime. So it would be aligned. And as y'all know, that would make more sense with y'all's budgeting process, because the tribal chairman, from what I understand, introduces a budget at that tribal address. By that time, the LTH board has made clear to me that on a go-forward basis, they expect me in this position to put pressure on LTE to tell LTH earlier how much funds are coming forward, so the chairman can propose a budget, and so the council knows that money's there, so you can do y'all work to start your budget by your federal fiscal year, 1 October.
If there's no further comments or questions, I want to thank everybody that's participated tonight and thank those folks that stayed with us on the line. Another great thing about this, if you didn't capture it all, you got tired of listening to me, I guess you'll be able to review it later. Thank you very much, our technical guys. Thank you very much. It's a lot. It's a tremendous amount of information. It's a tremendous amount.